Is it when my hair's down? Is it when the sky is blue? Who knows what makes me go in and out of focus? Okay, hello, it is Elle. Today I want to talk about ways to get into audiobooks. I first want to say that this is just going off of how I got into audiobooks, so there's probably plenty of ways to get into audiobooks. I'm sure people have tons of opinions on it. If you've tried audiobooks and they haven't really worked for you yet, I was once in a very similar boat, and I slowly progressed into them, and now I read them all the time. I find audiobooks a really nice way to bolster my reading. Since I started listening to audiobooks, I read quite a bit more because I can do other stuff as I'm listening to audiobooks. You know, I can go on walks. Sometimes my eyes are tired after a day of work, and I really do not want to look at another screen or another page. So listening to audio is a good way to help when my eyes are not really interested in looking at a piece of paper anymore. I don't need to get into why audiobooks are great. You know, for accessibility purposes, they're really nice. If you have a good library system, you can get them for free. That is how I listen in the US on Overdrive or Libby through my library. And then a lot of people don't know about Hoopla, so I actually didn't learn about it until I was watching Ashley at the Bookish Realms video about, I think it was just about audiobooks, and she mentioned this as a library resource, and it is something that my library did have, and it is a lot different from Overdrive, where you don't have to reserve a space in line. You only get a certain amount of checkouts a month, but they're immediate checkouts, and the collections are a lot different. So I would just recommend looking into that if you have not before and you live in the United States. And to my viewers who are outside of the United States, I apologize. This section was not for you. Anyway, okay, so I'm just going to go through steps of how I think are a good way to get into audiobooks. So let's just get into it. So the first thing would be getting into things that are more conversational, or getting into voices that you are used to. So an issue that I first had when I started listening to audiobooks or attempting to listen to audiobooks, I was having a hard time following a bunch of different characters. Maybe I was picking books that had more complicated writing, and it just wasn't translating very well to me. I was getting confused, getting lost. So one thing that I recommend getting into is memoirs of people that you already know. So if you are okay with listening to celebrity memoirs, a lot of the time they actually read their own memoir. So if you're used to their voice, it's a bit easier to intake because you kind of already know the cadence of their voice. And also, I find that a lot of celebrities or other famous folks who write their own books, writing is not their first job. And so it's written more like they would talk. And so then when they read it, it feels much more conversational than it does feel like they're reading fiction. They also so audiobook narrators read very slowly. And so most people you will hear listening to it on 1.25, 1.5, and so on speeds. I still do that sometimes or I have done that with celebrity memoirs, but they tend to talk faster when they're reading them anyway, so it's easier to keep them on the slow speed. So I would say if you're okay with celebrity memoirs, I personally don't like them that much, but I have listened to a few, and it did help me get into this. The second thing I would recommend is, or second type of book I would recommend getting into if that does not work for you or you do not like those, other books with simple language. So this might take a little bit of sorting out or looking at the physical book to make a decision on that, but I think middle grade or some YA is a good place to start with that, because in my experience, a lot of them I read are a bit more plot heavy. They're not using as complicated of words, and they're generally just easier to follow because they're targeted for younger audiences. So those are a good place to start because you can essentially get a little bit more distracted and you're still not going to be missing anything that's occurring. Okay, my third recommendation is trying to figure out, you're gonna have to figure out your audiobook preferences. So some people like one person that does the whole thing, and some people like a cast of characters. I would recommend looking into different audiobooks and listening to one of each, or listening to a few of each and seeing which one works better for you. I personally do not like full casts of characters. I find that if their voices are too similar, I get very confused. Whereas if it's one person and they're doing a lot of different voices, I can tell those apart better. But if it's two females or two males that have similar sounding voices, I will get lost very easily. That's just a recommendation of like figuring out what your taste is and then catering yourself more to that taste. There's tons of booktube lists out there of full cast audiobooks, single cast audiobooks, etc. Another thing that I think that people are a bit more frightened to do is increase the speed. So as I said, a lot of audiobook narrators speak very slowly, and I actually find that it is harder to concentrate when it's too slow, and it's also harder to concentrate when it's too fast. So maybe if you're having trouble focusing, try changing the speed and increasing it a little bit and seeing if that helps, because typically they're talking a lot slower than I am talking right now, and it gets harder to follow what someone is saying when they are talking so slow. You see what I mean? So maybe increasing the speed would help. There are good audiobook narrators and there are bad audiobook narrators, or not as good of ones. I really like ones that are one person doing the whole thing, and they use a lot of different voices. So if you find someone who does really distinct voices for different characters, listen to more of their audiobook. So a few examples that I can give is, I think his name is Michael Kramer. He's very famous in the fantasy genre for doing audiobooks. He did the Mistborn trilogy. His voices were like on point. I could tell before the quote was over and they said who was saying the line, I could tell who was talking based on how he narrated. And I actually have found that there are some books where the audiobook is so good and they breathe so much life into the characters that I think I enjoy the book more as an audio than I would have physically because of the narration job. So I think that sometimes you can gain things from audiobooks that you don't have in other format. Another way that I listen to audiobooks is so even though I've been listening to audiobooks for maybe like 4 years now, I do not listen to literary fiction on audio. I cannot get into the purple prose or maybe sparse language. Maybe a book where every word counts, I get lost. So some genres that I tend to focus on are memoirs when they're read by the author, nonfiction. I find that it's okay if the language is more dry or the reading is more dry. I can still keep up with it, and it's actually now my preferred format for nonfiction. I don't really like to read it in the physical context anymore. If I'm reading YA, it's typically audio. And then some genre fiction. So romance, I listen to mainly on audio, mystery, thrillers. And then maybe I should give some recommendations of audiobooks I've really liked or narrators I've really liked. So if you're interested in memoirs, Becoming by Michelle Obama, I thought that was really great. I really liked the conversational tone of it. Know My Name by Chanel Miller, that was a really great, devastating audio book, but also really great, and she also narrated it herself. Another audiobook I really liked is Behold the Dreamers. The narrator, which I'll put his name up, he was just fantastic. The accents he did were really good. Everyone felt very distinct. There was so much liveliness in his voice. I really loved that narration. Another one of the ones I did listen to when I first got into it, which is YA, The Lunar Chronicles by Marissa Meyer. If you're into YA, I loved all the accents she did. It was the first audiobook I had listened to where people actually did full-on different accents depending on who the character was. I enjoyed it probably more than I would have if I actually physically read the series. I probably would have DNF'd it if I did a physical read. Oh, for thrillers, You by Carolyn Kepnes. This is in second person, and I think that it added a total creep factor into it, that you were actually being talked to, and he was talking to you, and yeah, it just added a creepiness. and I thought the narration was done really well. When the character was getting angry, his voice changed quite dramatically. I will put the book and the audiobook narrator in the show notes for all of these. And then if you find an audiobook narrator, you can go onto Audible, even if you don't have an Audible account, and you can search by audiobook narrator and you can find their, what is it called? Not a filmography, because it's not film. Audiography? I don't know. Is there a word for that? There has to be. Yeah, there has to be. Interesting. If anyone knows that word, tell me. Oh, another one that I think that I wouldn't have liked as much if I had read it is Bunny by Mona Awad, because the voices were great. This is a weird book. I would not recommend it for everyone, but when she was speaking through the bunnies, just the voices she did when they were acting a certain way versus when they were talking, she totally changed them. It was spot on. It was spot on. That is a book, that is not everyone's taste, that I love. For nonfiction, so you want to talk about race, it really had a great one. I think the author did the narration. I might be wrong on that. Another nonfiction that I liked on audio is Twisted by Emma Dabiri. It, again, very conversational. That's a good one for a memoir that you could read if you don't like celebrity memoirs or don't have one in mind. It's the tangled history of Black hair culture. It was really great. She did a really good job of mixing her life experience into the history of hair. It also, again, felt very conversational while still being very informative. Yeah, and I'm sure there's tons that I haven't thought of or recommended. Again, I don't like ones that have many narrators, so I'm not going to recommend any of those. You'll have to look for another channel for that type of thing. But I think that's all I got. I think that those are my only tips that I really want to talk about. If you have any other recommendations for folks about how to get into audiobooks, put it down in the comments below. So until next time, happy reading!